It was back in 1973 when Diane Rehm, who was looking for something to expand her horizons, anticipating the day her two kids would be out of the house, heard of a possible volunteer opportunity at a radio station on the campus of American University. She walked through the doors of WAMU and offered her services for a program then called The Home Show. 6 years later, in 1979, she took over as the host of WAMU's morning talk show, which was subsequently renamed The Diane Rehm Show, and the rest, as they say, is history. As many of you who've been devoted listeners know, Diane's probing interviews and informative discussions have offered insightful perspectives on many, many issues, and her program, distributed by NPR, is currently broadcast on nearly 200 stations and on satellite radio across the country. Over the years, too, Diane has let us in periodically on her life and celebrated career through several memoirs, including Finding My Voice, Life with Maxie, and with her husband, John, Toward Commitment. In her newest book, On My Own, she provides a deeply moving and very revealing account of the final stages of John's life as he succumbed to Parkinson's disease and her efforts since he passed away nearly 2 years ago to reconstruct her life. With much evident thought and care, she reflects on loneliness, loss, guilt, worry, aging, and renewal. A review in Publishers Weekly said the book, quote, speaks powerfully to those who have lost a loved one and found the strength to carry on. And a USA Today reviewer wrote that Diane, quote, doesn't have all the answers, nor does she pretend to. What she does have, as always, is a flurry of important questions, perfectly considered and potently posed. Diane will be in conversation with Eleanor Clift, a journalist and author who I'm sure is familiar to many of you here as a regular panelist on the McLaughlin Group. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Diane Rehm and Eleanor Clift.
Thank you, Bradley, and thank you, Politics and Prose, which is my neighborhood bookstore, and I think it's everybody's neighborhood bookstore, certainly out here in Gaithersburg as well. Well, we're here to talk with Diane about her new book, On My Own, which is about charting a new life and honoring the life that she had for 54 years, married to John Rehm. The book is dedicated to the memory of John Rehm, and I have to say that I've known Diane now, I think it's 30 years. We first met and we bonded over the fact that we had both started our careers as secretary. I at Newsweek, Diane at the U.S. State Department, which is where she met John Rehm, who was a lawyer there. And when my husband was sick with cancer, now he's been gone 11 years, and we went into the hospice program, and Tom asked for a hospice volunteer who would come and have conversations with him. He said, I'm not looking for someone who flips eggs. I guess he meant he didn't want somebody to cook. And John was a hospice volunteer, and so he came and sat with Tom, and I think they talked about the great books or whatever, great existential issues that I don't think either of them ever shared with us. And I learned from Diane's book that the same year Tom died, at age 64, that John Rehm began to confront the initial symptoms of Parkinson's. And so, Diane, tell us, what made you write this book about the final chapter in John's life? But much of the book is about a lot of the meaningful and joyous times, before the final chapter. But the final chapter is important and one that we'll all face.
Absolutely. First, thank you all for being here in this not very great weather. You are darling to come out. Thank you. Thank you. I began writing this book on the night John Rehm was dying. I had stayed at the assisted living residence where he was, and I had the feeling that he was going to die that night. So I had slept on, or tried to sleep on, 2 chairs with Maxie on my stomach. Very important to have Maxie at all these events. And at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I could not sleep at all. I had my iPad with me, and I got up and began writing. I began writing about my anger, about my fury that John Rehm had had to spend 10 days dying. He had 10 days before told me, his doctor, his daughter, who is a doctor, his son, who is an academic, that he, John Rehm, was ready to die. He had Parkinson's. He could no longer feed himself. He could no longer bathe himself. He could no longer walk from bed to bath. He said, "My life is no longer worth living. I am dwelling in a state of degradation, and I do not wish to fall further into degradation where I know Parkinson's is taking me." He said this to the doctor and then turned to him and said, "Will you help me die?" And the doctor, a very kind man and very empathetic, totally understanding of John, said, "I'm sorry, but legally, morally, ethically, I cannot help you die." And Jenny, our daughter on the phone from Boston, said, "But Dad, we can keep you comfortable." And John Rehm said, "I do not want comfort. I am ready to die." At which point the doctor said, "John, the only thing you can do for yourself is to stop eating, stop taking medication, and stop drinking water." Now, most of you, I'm sure, know that one can dwell for a long, long time without food. But without water, the organs begin to break down very quickly. John asked the doctor whether he would be in pain. The doctor said, "I promise you, you will not be in pain." And so my son and I and the doctor left. Jenny hung up the phone. I came back the next day with a photograph album I had made for John from his earliest birth in Paris. He lived there for 6 years, came here speaking no English, through his graduation from Friends Seminary in New York. I got on the bed with John, put my arm around him, and looked at him, and I said, "My God, you look wonderful." And he smiled and said, "It's because I've had nothing to eat, no medication, and no water." And I said, "Sweetheart, are you sure that this is what you want?" And he said, "Absolutely." And that's how his long glide into what he felt was the next journey began.
You know, I think as a society we struggle with how to handle the end of life, and 5 states have now passed legislation that give people the right to choose how they would die if their illness is within 6 months of being terminal. And California is the latest state to do that, and actually it goes into effect next month on June 9. And Governor Jerry Brown, who was a Jesuit seminary student, struggled with the decision. And reading your book, Diane, you mentioned that there were family discussions going way back on life and death, and I believe John's parents, his mother and his father, had some decision over how they ended their lives. And you describe what John's ending as an act of relinquishment,
Exactly.
of giving into the process of dying, which I think is quite beautiful.
I felt, the idea of suicide strikes me as a harsh description of what John did. I do believe that John decided to relinquish his life because he felt it was no longer a life he wished to live. You mentioned California. Governor Jerry Brown, a former Jesuit, and I guess once a Jesuit, always a Jesuit, wrote in the closing paragraph of his signing statement, signing that law into reality, said, "I do not know what I would do when the time comes. What I do know is that I would not like for someone else to make that decision for me." I want to be clear. If you are a believer that God should be the only decider in when your life ends, I totally support you. I 100% am behind you. If you decide that you want any and all chemotherapy, radiation, every treatment, palliative care possible, I totally support you. And if you decide that your life is no longer what you want it to be, and you are in pain, suffering, the final stages of illness, and you wish to have the right to relinquish your life, I totally support you. It is the right to choose that I feel so very strongly about. Thank you.
Well, the book also is really touches a lot of chords when you describe how it was to be in the marital bed alone, even though you and John had been in separate residences and separate rooms for some time. There was still his side of the bed. I can so relate to that. I have a king-size bed. Tom's side of the bed now looks like a filing cabinet. I have replaced him with work. And so we all figure out a way to go forward. And if you could talk about how, in the book you say you went from your parents' house to sort of an early marriage, and then from that into a job, and then you met Diane. There was always somebody else's house.
Exactly.
Now it's your house.
Exactly. And one night, I think it must have been 10 days to 2 weeks after John died, I looked at the queen-size bed that the two of us had shared for so many years, with all the wonderful memories and sometimes not so wonderful memories. But looking at that bed and about to get in on my side of the bed, I finally thought, you know what? I'm going to move those pillows to the center of the bed. I am going to try to see what it feels like to take possession of that bed. Well, I did, and I was awake all night long. But I have since remained in the center of the bed. Maxie takes up some room, but not a whole heck of a lot.
Okay, if you could talk a little bit, it's been almost 2 years, I guess in June since we lost John, how your life is different, and maybe it's even better in some ways.
Well, I think that the years after we had to give up our home of 40 years because it was large and there were flights of stairs and we feared that John would fall, we finally decided we'd have to move to a condo, which we did. We chose together. I remember walking into the condo we purchased after looking for nearly a year, and I can remember John whispering to me in my ear, "Diane, look at the light." And there was light coming in every room, every window. And we both knew that that was the place we wanted to move. Now, as John had retired, he had begun volunteer work. He studied for a year to become a docent at the Freer and Sackler galleries in Washington. He began reading for the blind and dyslexic, and as you mentioned, Eleanor, he became a volunteer for hospice, the Washington home in Washington, D.C., and as a result, began reading with Tom and eventually just sitting with him. And we bought him a little yellow bug so he could get around in. He would wait for me until I came home from work so that we could go for a walk together. And all of a sudden, this wonderfully large man, 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, broad shoulders from having worked in his father's rock quarry on our farm, I began to hear a shuffle. And I had never heard John Rehm shuffle. He had such a strong walk and walked so steadily, shoulders high, back straight, and here was this shuffle. And I couldn't figure it out, and I asked him what that was all about. He said, "I don't know." But then, driving the little Beetle, he had 3 very small accidents within a period of 18 months. The insurance company called and said, "We're canceling his insurance." And John Rehm looked at me and said, "Well, we'll just find another insurance company." And I said, "I think we better have you tested first." And when he went for the driver's test with a former naval officer, the officer came back and asked to speak with me first. He said, "I almost stopped the car a minute into our session. John was on the wrong side. He went to make a right-hand turn from the left lane. how is he going to feel when I say to him, you should not be driving any further? And I said, I think he'll be fine. And when he was told he could not drive any longer, John said, you know what? I feel relieved. I feel as though the pleasure has gone out of driving for me. I am too anxious. From that point on, John began going downhill. He had back problems. He agreed to surgery, which I didn't want him to have. It just made things that much worse. He never was able to do the exercises required after having back surgery. And what was at work was not laziness, was not a lack of willingness to try. It was Parkinson's. Parkinson's takes away that impetus, that brain work necessary to help one do the things one needs to do to stay healthy. John began eating less and less and fewer foods. He lost some 50 pounds. And then one night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't know why I woke up, but I did. And I found him on the floor in front of the bathroom. You've heard, I'm sure, how difficult it is to lift a person who cannot lift him or herself. I got him to his knees, and then I literally dragged him inch by inch back to his bed and then put him on the bed limb by limb, at which point he fell asleep immediately. I had to get up at my usual 5 o'clock, so I did not go back to sleep. And that morning as I was leaving, he said, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. He said, I guess we'll have to talk tonight. And that was when we made the decision that he would have to go into assisted living, which was something neither one of us wanted. I felt the guilt because had I given up my work at that very moment, if I had decided for better or for worse in sickness and in health to live up to that vow, I could have given up my work and stayed home and taken care of him. But Eleanor, I knew I would not be a good caregiver. I knew that.
Right. Well, and I think for those of us who knew John and who know you, I don't understand why you would feel any guilt, because he would not have wanted you to give up your work.
I think you're
you
right.
still would have had a huge problem caring for him in an apartment. You'd have had to get 24-hour help.
Which we couldn't do.
So you made the right decision, and yet you still feel guilt. So what makes the guilt go away? Or why do you feel such guilt?
Well, I think I feel that guilt because John took such good care of me.
Okay.
He was a great caregiver. When I came down with spasmodic dysphonia and had to be off the air for 4 months, it was he who talked with my doctor, and they finally together decided I had to go to Johns Hopkins to decide whether I had Parkinson's or ALS or throat cancer or something that was causing this. And of course, thank God for the Johns Hopkins doctors. After I had struggled for 6 years seeing other doctors, in 1 hour, they diagnosed me with spasmodic dysphonia, which makes the vocal cords clamp down inappropriately. So once every 4 months, I fly out to Portland, Oregon, where my Johns Hopkins doctor now is. He gives me an injection of Botox right there into the throat. And yes, it hurts. And yes, I'm back on the air in about 2.5 weeks.
Right. And being on the air, she has given all of us a college education in so many different issues. So thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
I think we have time for some questions, if that's appropriate here. Is that okay?
It's open phones.
It's open. Open phones, right? Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
Good.
Over here and then here. All right.
Thank you. See, I told you, somebody else just said to us that her kids know when she's listening to NPR in the car, they can't turn the radio to another station. And I said, your kids will grow up listening to NPR. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You had, yeah.
Ah, oh, great. How long was John Rehm having symptoms of Parkinson's before he was actually diagnosed? I began seeing what was happening to him probably a year before he was actually diagnosed. Once that shuffle began, I really got worried. And then when I saw his hand begin to tremble, I got worried. And I finally said, I think we ought to go over to Johns Hopkins to see what's going on. And he was diagnosed in 2005 of Parkinson's disease, and he died in 2014. Wonderful sound. Back there. Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Let her.
Woo! No, wait till it's gone. What a great sound. I love that sound.
That's how we make America great.
Yes. Yes. Go right ahead.
Right.
Oh my gosh. You know, I have been part of the Parkinson's Action Network and part of the Parkinson's community for such a long time. Here's my take. Something is going wrong in people's brains. We are separating the Alzheimer's brain from the Parkinsonian brain, from the dementia brain, from the Parkinson's brain. Something is going wrong, and what I believe is that these scientists would perhaps do a little better if they all worked as a single group studying the brain and how it is going wrong. I understand that each of these diseases behaves differently, may begin differently, but my God, when the brain is gone, the brain is gone. I don't know enough to be able to tell you, except that in Alzheimer's, you have tangles of plaque. In Parkinson's, something goes on between the synapses of the nerves in the brain. Now, you know, if we could take apart, if we could see into, and we'll get there, if we could see into the brain of a Parkinson's individual or an Alzheimer's sufferer, if we could only see, and someday we will get there and we'll be able to sort it out. But right now, each of these scientific endeavors is on a different route. And frankly, I think it's going to take a long time. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right. Our listener and participant has asked about those facilities which will not allow individuals to stop eating, stop drinking. Be careful where you choose to go. I mean, no disrespect, but Roman Catholic facilities will not allow you to choose to die. I mean, no disrespect, but you must be careful. If you believe you are going in there and will have choices to make, you must be very, very thoughtful. There was a case in Canada where the facility, the children knew that their mother, who was suffering from Alzheimer's, she had said before she went into the facility, please, when the time comes, I want to stop eating, I want to stop drinking. The facility, which was Roman Catholic, disagreed and began holding out a spoon to this poor woman who would open her mouth. And they took that as evidence that she wanted to continue eating. So you have to choose very, very carefully.
Actually, the Canadian Supreme Court ordered the right to choose be
Just
put
recently.
into law. And because the new government had just won and hadn't taken office yet, they gave them a little time to write the law. But so they're squared away. Our
Pierre
neighbors to the
Trudeau's
north.
son.
That's
Yeah,
right.
right. Yes, sir. Right back there.
Yeah.
It's trickier. He asked, what about those who choose to end their lives just because they want to, even if they're not ill? You know, I am no psychiatrist. I am no therapist. I know my own limits, and I know that my cause and mine alone, is for those who have been sick, who are in terrible pain and suffering, it is for them that I'm speaking out. For those who wish to end their lives simply because they no longer wish to live, that's a choice they must make. I'm not speaking out on that cause.
And that's not covered by any of the
That's
laws
right.
in this country. The states that
right.
have passed these right to choose laws require physicians to certify that you are within 6 months of your death, that the disease you have is terminal, and that's what's going to kill you. And you have to have 2 doctors certify you're of sound mind. There are all kinds of precautions, and this legislation has been in place in Oregon for more than 15 years.
Right.
And it has not been abused. And now some European countries have a different experience, but you'll notice Diane and I will never say euthanasia because that's not what this is about.
That's not
Yeah.
what this is about. And one more word on Oregon. Only 2/3 of those patients who've received the medication after being declared within 6 months of death have actually used it. In other words, by simply receiving the medication, they have taken their own lives back into their own hands and then proceeded to live on. Yes, please, way in the back. Yeah. Well, you never know, but of course. And so he stayed. Right. Good. Good. Well, and that is sure. And your last words are exactly my theme. I believe we should have the right to choose. All right, I'm going to stop you right there because there's another. Right, I do too. Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure he's wondering about new drugs for treatment of Parkinson's disease, and the fact of the matter is there are a number of drugs being tested, and it takes time for the testing process. It takes time for the FDA approval process. We have no idea whether, in fact, these cancer drugs, and I have heard about these, will eventually find some approval from the FDA. We shall all hope that that's the case. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir. Please stand up. Do I think there will ever be a cure for Parkinson's? I wish I could say yes. I mean, think about HIV/AIDS and think about the incredible toll it took on the country and the AIDS community before not a cure, but a way to create a chronic disease, not a fatal one, was finally found. It took a great deal of uprising from the community as a whole, and someday, with both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, which is going to be a huge scourge on this country as the population ages and more individuals are affected by it. I mean to tell you, this Congress is not appropriating sufficient funds to study any of these really, really deadly and serious diseases. But I hope and pray someday. Yes, please. Would you be good enough to stand? Thank you. All right, but I'm going to get to you before you finish that. And let me ask you, if I may, did you see the Alzheimer's process beginning? And was she coherent and reasonable for quite a while before the Alzheimer's took over? All right, and that's where the dilemma lies. Mm-hmm. There was in the New York Times Magazine last year an article about a husband and his wife, and the wife knew she had Alzheimer's, and her mother had had it, her aunt had had it, she knew she had the gene, and it was becoming more and more apparent to her. She and her husband together decided when she would take her own life because she did not want to fall into the same degradation that my husband did not choose to fall into. So what I would say to everyone is, the only way the right to die is going to be made nationwide acceptable is if we as individuals, as family members, begin to talk about what we want for ourselves with our families. There is now, you're going to laugh at this, there's now in St. Louis a group called Cupcakes and Death. And it is a group of neighborhood organizations where not only family members but neighbors come together and take notes for each other about what they want at the end of life. And these people all talk with their children, they talk with their extended families, so everybody knows, and there's no shock at the end. There's no dilemma. What do we do? How do we deal with this? Please talk with each other about what it is you want. Talk with your children so they understand what you want. As difficult as it may be, talk with your parents about what they want. And you can start the conversation by saying something like, you know, I've been thinking an awful lot about the end of life issues lately, and I know what I want. I wonder if you know what you want. And get it going. Don't wait. It's too important. And all of you are so important. Thank you so much for being here.